Welcome to Bounce Back Stronger, the podcast that explores ways to find peace and purpose no matter what happens. I'm your host, Donna Ferris, and today's guest is author, podcaster, and widowed parent advocate, Jenny Lisk. A little about Jenny. Jenny Lisk is the founder of the Widowed Parent Institute and the author of Future Widow and Widowed Parents Unite 52 Tips to Get Through the First Year from One Widowed Parent to Another. Jenny's work, which includes the Widowed Parent podcast, has touched the lives of many parents navigating life after loss. She's here today to share invaluable insights from her own experience, as well as the collective wisdom of the parents she has interviewed and worked with from around the globe. Jenny, thank you so much for being with me today. It's an honor to speak with you.
Thank you, Donna. I've been looking forward to this.
And me too. Me too. And I have to say, thank you so much for sending me a copy of Future Widow.
Of course.
And I read it on a road trip we did this weekend to DC, and I kept tearing up, and my husband kept going, "Are you right? Are you right?" And yeah, and there was one part I think that made me tear up the most. It was early in actually. It was when you were writing about how you were going to help yourself write the memoir and you were going to wear this shirt and you were going to get multiple copies of this shirt. Can- And can you tell me what the shirt said and why that was so important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. The shirt says, "Nevertheless, she persisted."
This makes me tear up now.
And yeah, I wrote that in the preface of the book, actually, because
Hmm.
it kind of framed, right, this writing this. I never thought I'd be a memoir writer, right? And writing a memoir is hard. And I learned a
Hmm.
lot about the process. I should have known that the genre is obviously, by definition, it's vulnerable, right? But
Yeah.
I didn't, but to your point about the shirt, I was trying to get this book written and I kept thinking, oh, I'm going to write an hour every morning, or I'm going to write every Saturday morning for a half a day, or all these different things I tried, right? That people suggest writers do. And I was getting frustrated because I wasn't getting it done. And it wasn't just a time thing, right? It
Hmm.
was like there was some internal roadblock that was making me think, or, use the excuse to myself, I don't have time.
Hmm.
And finally, I was like, what? The only way I'm going to get this done is if I clear my calendar for the month of August. And this would have been August of
Hmm.
2019. And I write 1,000 words a day. And I don't know if that's too many words or not enough words, but if I can stick to it, by the end of the month, I should have 30,000 or so words. And I'm gonna get this shirt that says, "Nevertheless, she persisted," because I'm gonna have to persist and push through these roadblocks to do this. And the other thing I did was to keep myself accountable, posted on social media what I was doing. At first, I posted every day, and then I kind of went to every other day. And I was like, okay, today I wrote 1,005 words. I made it. And maybe wrote some things about what I struggled with that day in terms of the writing, I mean, like,
Hmm.
or I tackled this part, or I tackled that part, or I'm really wondering how to do this part, or I'm hitting my head against the wall, or whatever it was, right? And I think one day I was like, I didn't make it. And so then
Yep.
the next day I was like, all right, I did 2,000 words today. So I'm good now. Right.
That's amazing.
And yeah, and the thing, and I don't know if you people are listening here who are wanting to write a book or thinking about it, but this is kind of, I mean, it was first of all, it was an accountability tool for me, and it was terrific. Secondly, it gave me something to share with my people, right? My friends, my family, all the extended lifetime of people you're connected to on Facebook, right? Of what I'm working on with this book that's not coming out for a year or however long in the future, right? And them following along and people starting to say, wow, I can't wait to read it. I'm so
Yep.
excited. So it's kind of early marketing essentially, but I'm not saying that cynically. I'm not saying I was
Hmm.
just doing it like just to be marketing. I mean, but I'm just saying there are lots of benefits to being kind of open and giving some behind the scenes in the author journey as you go along.
Yeah. And you give people a model too for their own writing to see somebody going through that and writing about it because it's hard. I mean, I wrote a memoir too. It's hard to write a memoir, and especially when you're dealing with difficult things like you were dealing with.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about memoir, Julie Lithcott-Hames is an author and she's written mostly about parenting things, but she wrote a memoir as well. And I heard her say a long, long time ago, memoir is an act of service.
Mm.
And I really tried to keep that affixed in my mind as I worked through this. And in fact, I put sticky note. Now, see, people who are listening can't see. I'm pointing to the area above my desk here, and I put this sticky note, and I said, "Memoir is an act of service," and I put it up there. And every time I was like tearing my hair out, why am I writing this book anyway? Maybe I should just trash the whole thing. I'd look at that sticky note, and I'd be like, "All right, why am I writing this? Because there are other people who are coming after me." I was 43, Dennis was 44. Our kids were 9 and 11, and he was diagnosed with glioblastoma, which is a terminal brain cancer. Now, I say terminal, very, very low single digit survival rate. I actually do know somebody now who has survived, like somebody I
Mm.
met later who's
Wow.
lived 20 years now and she's cancer free, but that's like the huge exception to the rule. And so my point being that I knew there would be people coming after me with spouses who are gravely ill or terminally ill or dying or had died, who had kids, who were asking themselves, what do I do now? Right? Like, I don't know how to do this. I didn't sign up to be a widowed parent.
Mhm.
I have two kids and we have sort of a quote unquote normal life, whatever that means. Normal can look lots of ways, but normal did not include dead parent. And I just felt like I don't know how to do this job that I wasn't expecting and didn't ask for.
And you looked for books to help you and did a lot of research. So it's not like you didn't try to find something, but sometimes when you don't find what you need, you got to write it.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe I'm kind of a book person like that. I went to Amazon and I typed in, I don't know what the search term was, but something like, where's the book that's gonna help me solve this problem? Like the book that's gonna give me all the answers, right? And I didn't find anything. And what I didn't know at the time also was that there are grief centers in many communities. I like to call them kids and family grief centers. They usually have names like Kate's Club or Judy's House or Dougie Center. They have
Hmm.
names for the work they're doing in the communities, but essentially it's a like a local grief support program for kids and for families. And if they're large enough, sometimes they have separate adult programs as well, where they have support groups for different ages of kids, teenagers. Oftentimes they'll have young adults. Like I said, sometimes they'll have programs for adults. Sometimes if it's just maybe for parents of the children in the programs. Sometimes it's for other adults in the community with other types of losses. Sometimes they're big enough to have groups broken down by type of loss or amount of time since the loss happened, or
Mm.
even groups for men and groups for women, groups for different types, child loss, spouse loss, sibling loss, different kinds of things. Anyway, most of these have kid groups for small kids and grade school kids and high school kids. I didn't know about them at the time. The other thing is, and by the way, I'm a member of the organization that's the National Alliance for Children's Grief, of which all these centers are members too.
Mm.
They're doing terrific work. Also, here's what I kind of have been thinking about a lot. Even if your kid went to one of those programs, like once or twice a month, and maybe if they went to a therapist every week, and there are actually things called grief camps that you can go to in the summer for a few days, like Camp Aaron is a good example.
Hmm.
It's like, yeah, it's like summer camp with some summer camp stuff like a ropes course or a campfire or singing or whatever, and some like grief stuff, like
Hmm.
let's talk about our dead people and let's do things with pictures to make memories and like grief stuff woven in with regular kid stuff. Anyway, even if your kid went to that camp and went to a therapist and a grief group, and that's a lot of grief work, by the way, and those are all really good supportive things to do. Even with all that, one time I wonder if I add up all the days, like how many days out of the year is that? There's still like 300 other days in the year where the kid is not doing any of those things.
That's right.
And it's all on the parent, me, and my listeners, my readers, people who are still raising their kids in their teens and their partner died. It's all on the parent, right, to figure out what to do to serve their own kids. And so I think there's still a huge need in helping parents with their own parenting and help their own kids on top of what grief centers are doing with kids in their programs.
And that's if the kids are willing to talk about it.
Well, that's true, right? And that can be tricky. One of the things that I learned, I had to learn all these things, right?
Hmm.
I was an IT person before. I spent 20 years at a large tech company doing like project management and things like this. And I was a competent enough parent at regular stuff, quote unquote, regular
Hmm.
kid stuff. But this idea that like even if the kid doesn't want to talk about it, whatever it is, the particular, the problem, the feelings, the situation, that it's important to send the message to them that the door is open
Hmm.
to those conversations, right? Even if you bring something up and they're like, ah, mom, I don't want to talk about it. No, dad, go away, whatever. You're sending the message
Hmm.
that the door's open. And so maybe they do want to talk about it tomorrow or next week or next year,
Hmm.
right? You're sending that message that the door is open for this topic and for other hard topics too. And that's an important message to be sending, I think, for all parents, and in this case, parents in this context.
Yeah. And it's hard for kids to talk about it or to handle grief because we don't really do it very well in this Western culture, right?
That's true. That's true. And that's one of the reasons why it's helpful for kids to go to some kind of grief support program. Like, for example, I mentioned the Dougie Center, which is in Portland, Oregon. If anybody's listening in Portland, Oregon, and you are somebody who has kids who are grieving, it's a terrific program. And there are programs like that in other communities. But for example, lots and lots of kids report that at school, they're kind of like things might be awkward. Other kids don't want to talk to them because they don't know what to say. Maybe they even get excluded. Like maybe the kid is even like, I just want to do video games and soccer with my friends, but the other kids are sort of treating them like with like a fragile item or
Uh,
something, right? They don't want to say anything about the death, so they don't say anything at all. So then the kid is like excluded from their friends, excluded, but sort of that
hmm.
subtle kind of awkwardness at a time when they really need their friends the most. And
Exactly.
so being, able to participate in a camp in the summer or in an ongoing program every month or every however twice a month with other kids who kind of get it because they also lost a parent. And sometimes kids who lost a sibling might be in the same group. But kids where even if you're not talking about death and sitting here having this conversation about specifically about the death, you're just with other kids who get it. And there's a certain comfort and support in that. And that's a really important factor that I think it's overlooked a lot.
That's a really good one. What other things do you think we could do to make it easier for families that are grieving?
Oh, well, depends which direction. When you say we, do you mean like supporters, like the people around them, or do you mean
People
what?
around them. I think that's something that people do really struggle with. They don't really know what to do. I think you mentioned what to say, but they don't know what to do.
That's a good one. And I learned a lot. Like I was one of the people before all this, in the before times, right, who didn't know what to say, didn't want to say the wrong thing, just kind of it's easier to clam up and hide, and that way aren't doing anything wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then being on the other side of this experience, going through 8 months, Dennis was sick, and then he died, and then we had all the time after, and seeing how people, what they said, what they didn't say, who said things, the people who come out of the woodwork. Sometimes it's the people you expect, and sometimes it's people who you're maybe sort of tangentially related to,
Hmm.
and they, for whatever reason, step up. Maybe they have comfort level and experience based on something in their own background. And so I think that thinking about, well, so actually this is an area that I've started to write and support on. And so griefallies.com might be a good link for your show notes because I put a bunch of stuff there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Some of it is like the what to say, not what not to say kind of stuff. Anything that starts with at least, just like erase that whole sentence, like right?
I love that.
That's an example.
Oh, that's amazing.
A whole bunch of practical ideas that go beyond casseroles. So, like when it comes to bringing food, for example, maybe somebody sets up a meal train. We had people set up a meal train for us, and people brought food 3 times a week, which was terrific. And also, sometimes people, when they would bring their dinner, they would throw in some like fresh fruit or some dessert or snack items. And like, hey, I thought you might like to have this around for breakfast or for lunch. Like, even though their assignment was to bring dinner on Tuesday, they threw in some extra stuff which was great because I wasn't going to the grocery store
Mm-mm.
and I wasn't doing that stuff. And speaking of not going to the grocery store, lots of people like to say, and I have to stop myself from saying it too, let me know if I can do anything to help. Right. And people say that because they truly mean it. Like, I will try to do almost anything. So let me know and then I'll try to do it. It's genuine. Also, they don't want to overstep or assume or things like this. The thing is, when it gets received, and I had no idea until I was on the side of receiving this, is that you're like, that's too big. I don't know. Unless it's like your sister or something,
Hmm.
where first of all, you either know that she will do anything, or secondly, what she's good at, and so you're not going to ask her to do the things she's not good at, right?
Right,
Like,
right, right. Yeah,
and so it's such a broad statement that I would find myself thinking, okay, now I have to be nice and thank them, and I do thank them, and I do appreciate it. And also, I'm thinking to myself, I don't think I'm going to be able to call because I don't know what you want to do.
yeah. It's too much energy in that space, in when you're
Yeah,
in that space.
yeah, maybe I don't know what I need, first of all.
Yeah, yeah.
Secondly, getting a little more specific, right? If somebody says, if you ever need anything from Costco, let me know. Okay, that sounds specific. But also, I know going to Costco is a pain. And I know you got to drive there, and there's a big line, and there's a lot of people, and you don't go to Costco every day. I don't know where your Costco is. My Costco is not like on my regular route.
It's not.
So it's a trip. If you had said to me, let me know if you need something from Costco, I'm not going to say, oh, I need cat food and toilet paper desperately. Can you please go to Costco for me? Because you're probably in the middle of taking your kids to soccer practice and finishing your work and figuring out what you're doing for dinner and whatever all you're doing, right?
Yeah,
Carrying that example through, one time, one of my neighbors texted me and she said, I'm at Costco right now. What do you need?
that's a good one.
Yeah. And then I was like, oh, now
Let me
I
get the
know.
list.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm not bothering her,
You're
right? She
right.
is already there. She can put three more things in her cart and bring them to me, right?
Hmm.
Same idea was when another neighbor texted me and she said, I'm going to the grocery store in the morning. Text me your list. I'll drop it by your porch around 10 a.m. if that's all right.
That's
And
perfect.
I was like, great, she's already going. I'm not bothering her. Right. And so
Right,
that kind of stuff where you can get specific is, I find, the most helpful way to be supportive.
right. That's really good advice. And you're right. I think when you're going through grief, there's a lot of energy that's lost, right, in all of that. Any type of interaction can be exhausting. So getting more specific with your interactions with somebody around wanting to help them is probably really helpful all around, right?
Yeah, because let me know what I can do to help. Then it gives me a decision-making burden,
That's right.
right? What,
And
first of all, what do I need? Secondly, what sorts of support or help or whatever are you likely to want to provide or be able to provide or whatever? Like, it adds this decision-making burden.
burden.
Now, I would add there's one exception would be like if one person wants to become the point person and that person sits down with me and says, okay, I've got a bunch of people who want to help with stuff. Can we brainstorm a little? Can we figure out what you need? Can me and that one person spend some time, a close friend, a close neighbor, a close sister, somebody close, sit down and brainstorm the stuff that maybe you're not thinking about? So, for
Yeah.
example, in my case, our house was in the middle of being remodeled when
Oh,
Dennis
I
went in
saw
for his
that.
first surgery.
You're
Yeah, we
doing
had
a
some,
kitchen remodel.
yeah, we had some water damage in the kitchen, and it was like all in the crawl space and mold and like all this terrible stuff.
Oh,
And so at the point in the project when he went in for his surgery, we had no stove, we had no sink. The refrigerator was plugged in on the deck. Like, I think when we left to go to the doctor's appointment, we left the floor installers in the house, like banging on things to install the floor, right?
oh my God.
So the house was kind of in disarray. And so, one of my friends and my sister sat down and said, okay, can you give us sort of a brain dump on what you think needs to be done? Because we've got some parents in the community who have either some DIY skills, or some of them have some contractor skills, or
Yeah.
some of them have some contractor connections. And can you give us a list and we'll organize a work party? And so I didn't have to field, oh, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? I just gave one brain dump, and they organized all these people to do all these inside things and outside things, painting and installing the new doorbell and like this whole list of things.
Wow.
And so the point being, if one close person says, let's have a brainstorming session, like I wouldn't have thought of, oh, maybe I should ask people to do all these inside and outside house things. That wouldn't have crossed my mind. But brainstorming with one close person and then pushing it all off to her, delegating, and then she could field, somebody wants to help. Oh, do you want to paint on Friday? Oh, no. Would you rather bring, yard gloves and weed on Friday or dig things or whatever? That was super helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
I want to say one more thing on this topic of grief allies. I mean, I could say lots more, but the thing I didn't want to miss, and I think what people struggle with, is that people really want to fix, quote unquote, air quotes for the people who can't see me, fix the problem, right? And me too, right?
Mhm.
I have, how many times have I felt like, oh, I'm gonna put off writing this condolence card because if only I can, think of the magic words, somehow I can make the problem all better with magic words in my condolence card. Well, of course I can't,
Mhm.
right? And in this case, with a spouse who's gravely ill, right, nothing anybody could say or anybody could do would fix the actual fundamental underlying problem. Nobody could change the diagnosis with their words. Nobody could have a magic wand and change the fact that he was going to die and I was going to be a widowed parent, right? Nobody could like fix the actual problem. But what they could do, and what you can do with your words or your actions, is fix the sort of surrounding practical problems, right?
Mm,
Also, a problem is that the kids need to get to soccer practice. Well, you can fix that for me,
mhm.
right? Another problem is that I don't have a sink. Well, you can call your contractor friend to come put my sink in and you fix that problem for me. And so, where you can't fix the actual problem, I think it's important that we give ourselves permission to say, look, this is what I want to do and I can't, and that's okay. And so, what can I do? What
Mhm.
other things can I do that can be supportive and helpful? Because there's plenty you can do that's supportive and helpful, even when you can't take away the actual underlying problem.
Right. I think what you're getting to is we can feel like we can throw our hands up because we can't really help the real problem, but you can ease the experience of the people that are affected,
Yeah. And right. And
right?
by taking some of those other problems off my hands, it frees me up to
Yes.
do, to grieve or to
To
talk to
breathe,
people to get
yeah,
support or
to
to
just do the
sleep.
things, to do the things that you have to do to kind of get through the period, to persist.
Yeah. Yeah, to like the shirt, right? Persisting, exactly. And it just makes the things that you can do make it easier. And that's enough.
It is enough.
And I think
And
once we give ourselves that permission, then it removes that barrier to acting, right? I mean, and I'm not joking, how many condolence cards I never wrote. I didn't intend to not write them. I'm like kicking it down the road, right? Like, oh, well, maybe next week and maybe it's not even quite as explicit in my mind, but just like, I can't think of what to write right now. This notion that if I magically push it down the road a week or a month or 6 months or who knows how long, maybe I'll have the right words then, which is, of course, silly. And the ultimate effect is I never sent the card, even though that wasn't what I intended, right? And so
yeah.
if I give myself permission up front to say, I'm gonna write this card, I'm not going to try to think I have to solve any problems with this card. I just need to let my friend know that I'm here and I care and I'm sorry they're going through this terrible thing.
And the cards matter, the going to the funerals matter, the
Yeah.
all of that goes. I can remember the people that came to my fiance's funeral. I can remember almost every face.
Mm,
Even though I don't remember much of what I said or anything else, I remember the faces,
yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. It's amazing which parts we remember, which parts become important. And I'm glad your friends showed up for you like that.
Yeah, and like you said, it was somewhat uneven, right? And I think it has nothing to do with the relationships. It has to do with how comfortable we are with grief,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Totally.
whether you've been
Yeah.
there before.
Some
Uh,
people who showed up for me were sort of acquaintances at the time. I remember one person, she's now a friend, of course, right? And she was someone connected in our school community. And so it was more like a friend of a friend kind of thing. And her kids were older, so I didn't really know her. But she started sending me a card like once a week
mm,
in the mail. And sometimes it was just, I'm thinking about you and something. Sometimes she'd throw in a little Starbucks card and she'd say, because he was at the hospital a lot and there was a Starbucks in the lobby, right? And so she's like, hey, you can get yourself a little treat when you're at the hospital. Sometimes she'd throw in a little Cold Stone ice cream gift card, take the kids out for a little treat,
hmm
right? And sometimes it was just a card saying whatever. I don't even remember what she said, but it was the overall care and thought. Just, hey, someone's thinking about us and they haven't forgotten. And we've been dragging on week after week, month after month during all this illness and eventually hospice. And she's still thinking about us. And just knowing that is enough, no matter what she says.
When people have a death, I actually have started to give them something that they can do outside. There's something that's joyful, like go to the
Mm,
movies. And I know I have a friend that they
mm,
love the Waffle House, so I gave them a Waffle House gift certificate.
yeah,
Trying to find ways to just lift yourself a little bit is
yeah,
really helpful in those
yeah,
post days, rather than you don't need another bouquet of flowers because they die or plants. And I do have a lot of lovely plants out of the grieving that I did at that time. And thank you for everyone who sent them. But I would have the experience and of a little bit of happiness, I think is good for people going through difficult time.
yeah. And it's a little different too, right? I don't know what it is exactly, but I mean, somebody sent me a card for like Fandango or something, like the movie
Yeah,
ticket place,
exactly. That's what I did.
And yeah, and I don't think I even used it for like 2 years or
Oh
something. But
yeah,
then I was
that
like,
might take
oh,
you a while.
I have this card in the drawer, and I think I had even been to the movies before that, of course. But
You
like, oh, I
figure.
have this card in the drawer, and so sent it to me. This is great. And you know what? There's a movie we wanted to see. Let's do that. And so those kind of things, which I would never have thought of. I mean, until I went through all this and saw the variety of ways people responded. And that's one of the reasons that I have tried to put out some stuff on this to be helpful because, well, first of all, people started reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, like neighbors or other people that I knew, and they knew I had been through this, and they'd say, "Oh, my friend's husband just died, and they have two little kids, or my colleague's wife just died, and he has two teenagers. What should I do?
Hmm.
How can we be supportive?" And I started individually answering, right? And then I was like, "Okay, this is happening enough that I think I should put some stuff together. And if it's somebody that I'm close to, I'll be like, okay, read this first, and then let's talk. So then I don't have to like reiterate all the basics and stuff. But then if they have more questions or want to brainstorm or something, that's fine. But
Yeah,
um, yeah.
it's funny because I wrote my memoir to get through. That was totally to get through a difficult time. That was the main reason. I just needed to figure, I need to write my way out of it.
Mm,
But the second book I wrote, the Bounce Back Stronger book, was for that reason, was what you just
mm,
said. Like people would
mm,
ask me about what they think, or they, what should they do, or what are some of the things that helped you get through that difficult time? And I was like,
yeah.
here, just have it. And I have coloring pages in my book, so I give them crayons too. I'm like, here, have books.
Oh, well, that's fun.
Because yeah, I think that's, you know, the joy of doing that. You can write a book that actually you wish you had to give them, but
Yeah,
here it is
yeah,
instead.
yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah, and it's funny because I mean, not funny. None of this is funny, but
no,
anyway,
but that's what we say.
I know, right? It's odd. It's right. My original idea, and the book that I still haven't written is going to be called The Widowed Parent Handbook.
Hmm.
And it's going to be like somebody likened it to the What to Expect When You're Expecting books, but it's
Yes,
like what to expect when the other parent dies kind of
that's right.
thing, like the nonfiction magnum opus on the topic.
You should do it.
And well, yeah, but I am going to, but the problem is it is tricky because if there was an answer, well, that would be an easy book to write, right? It's not like I can say do X, Y, Z, and ABC, and you'll be fine.
Right. You can do what I did is I said, this is what worked for me. So I'm also sober. So one of the things they always say is take what works and leave the rest. So
Oh
that's
yeah,
what I started off with, take what works and leave the rest and
yeah,
add to it. Like if there's things that I'm missing or you want to write up your own book, you should. I
yeah,
mean, this doesn't end. This is an age-old thing. Sorrow and suffering doesn't end. We
mm,
just have to get better at it.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that is all you're trying to do. So it
yeah.
won't work for everybody, but something will.
Well, and I'd like to think that I could hopefully structure it to be helpful, like between bringing in other people's stories, bringing in interviews with experts,
Yeah.
maybe having some models, sort of key principles, things to know, and so that to try to help, like, okay, there's not an answer, but here are some things to be thinking about, some things to try, some things that might work for your family. That I don't like really like the word case study here, but it's kind of some case study stuff. But I decided to start with the memoir Future Widow because I knew that this nonfiction book would be a much bigger lift. And I knew I wasn't ready to write that yet. And I'm
The
actually,
opus.
yeah, and I have this podcast, the Widowed Parent Podcast, and that in a way is research inputs into that
Sure
ultimate
is.
book, right? I mean, some of the people I interview are widowed parents sharing their stories. Some of them are experts on different topics, all different aspects of this whole puzzle, right? And so I've started to make an outline, and I need to identify gaps and then go look for people to interview on those gaps and all the things. But I thought I could do the memoir first because that's
Mhm.
my story, and I may as well kick it off with my own story. I knew it was going to be a while before I wrote this other book, and so I wove some things into the memoir. Not a teaching memoir exactly. I know that's kind of becoming a hot genre these days, but in a little bit of that aspect where we're weaving in the things I wish I had known
Mhm.
that I think then are sort of principles that might generally be applied by other people
Yeah.
too.
I noticed that you put in the memoir a little bit about talking to kids as you go through these things. Do you want to take a moment about that? That one really struck me because I know I didn't do a really great job at it. And I wish if I had to go back, I would have done a
Yeah.
better job of
Yeah.
talking my way through this with my kids.
This is one of, I think it was the hardest things for me to figure out. Like, how do I talk to them? And specifically, like, how honest should I be? And what I've learned subsequently, and therefore made it into the book, and what I talk to people about, is it is really important to be honest with kids
Mhm.
about difficult situations, and probably especially about difficult situations. And one way you can do that is kind of let their questions be your guide. And there's kind of a rule of thumb: if a kid is old enough to ask a question, they're old enough to get an honest answer.
Mm.
And one of the ways where I see people run into trouble with this is especially with so-called stigmatized losses. So losses due to suicides and overdoses and sometimes homicides. People don't want to be honest with kids about what's going on. And
Mhm.
and it's always out of the best of
Mhm.
desires, right? To protect them
Protect them.
from some hard information, bad situation, difficult everything, right?
Right.
The thing is, kids are perceptive. And kids will, first of all, they might just think things don't quite add up, or they notice that adults get quiet when they come in the room, right? And like, something's not right here. I don't know what it is, but something's off, right?
Right.
Eventually, they'll learn the truth. And maybe it's because some other kid tells them on the playground.
That's right.
Maybe it's because they become old enough to Google things, and they Google their name or their dead parent's name, or they Google something and they find a news article about their parent that died with some tragic circumstance that's public information that they find on Google. And but so first of all, as a parent, like, you don't want your kid to find out these things, these terrible things at all. It's like you can't make it better, but you could make it worse.
Yep.
Because if you're telling them yourself, there's more support and you have an opportunity to support them. Whereas if they find out the exact same information on their own on Google or from a friend or from wherever, then they don't have your support when they're hearing that information. That's one part. The other part is it tends to undermine the trust that they need to have with their surviving parent. It's kind of this: if they lied to me about this really important thing, what else have they lied to me about?
You break a real bond in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it turns out, and this was fascinating, this grief person who works at Our House Grief Support Center in Los Angeles, Lauren Schneider, I interviewed for one of the episodes a while back, and she's the first one that I heard talking about this, that it's that bond of trust between the kid and the surviving parent is super important, both for its own sake and also as the basis of the kid's ability to form trusting relationships throughout their lifetimes.
That's right.
Right? So you're hoping that when your kid grows up, they're going to be able to form trusting relationships with future partners, future friends, future colleagues, future citizens of the world, right? Like you want them to be able to have the capacity to trust other people. And that can be damaged if the parent hasn't told them the truth about, for example, the suicide of their other parent or anything else. Even telling like the fact that the parent is going to die, if you know that they have an illness that's terminal and you tell them, oh, they're going to fix it, they're going to fix it, it's just a very difficult situation. Like I said, you can't make any of it better, but you can make it harder.
And you're also modeling how to handle these things in all of
Yeah.
this interaction. And really you can't do much else for people but model the
Yeah.
behavior you hope that they take on. And so that's another one to kind of remember. It's just like when you curse in front of your kids and then that's the word that they say. It's the same stuff. You know, it's
Yeah. The other thing I want to add is that if anybody's listening and thinking, oh no, I've really messed this up, you can always go back. Like, it's kind of the know better, do better kind of thing. And
Yep.
you can always go back and say, look, there's something I need to tell you. I want to apologize. I thought I was handling it the right way at the time.
Mm.
I've learned these things, right? It's never too late to kind of reopen the door. I mean, ideally, it would be open from the beginning. And the kids and family grief centers that I mentioned, and actually, I'll give you a link because the National Alliance for Children's Grief has a lookup tool, like where you can look
Oh,
by your
wow,
zip
cool.
code or your city or whatever, and you can find programs near you. And I believe it's at childrengrieve.org. And so you can always call a grief center and like ask for some guidance. And actually, the Dougie Center, which I mentioned, is in Portland, Oregon. They're also a national leader in the space. And anybody, even if you're not in Portland, can call them and ask for some advice on talking with your kids. So you could call them up and be like, look, I need some advice. This is what happened. This is what I'm struggling with. Can you help me figure out how to talk to my kids? And talk to an expert and kind of learn some things. So Dougie.org is where you can find them. And I think they're terrific and
Is
do
it
a lot of
two?
good work in the field.
Sorry, is it two G's?
Dougy.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Dougie.org. And yeah, like I said, highly recommend them. And they got a lot of resources on their website too, and a good podcast.
That's awesome. Was there something I forgot to ask or that you want to mention before we close?
I think we've covered most of it, and I would point people to the resources that I have at the Widowed Parent Institute. And so just at widowedparentinstitute.com/resources, got free things, including for grief allies, so supporting people, and then for widowed parents too, tips and advice and stuff like that. And I would suggest starting there, listen to some of our podcast episodes if this topic is something that would be useful to you or people you know.
Pass it on.
So yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so, so much for all of that you're doing and for being with me today. I learned a lot.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. That's all for today. If you want to learn more about Jenny's books, podcast, and the Widowed Parent Institute, those links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this episode was helpful. If it was, please subscribe, drop a review, or share it with your friends and family. That's the best way to get it in the hands of those who may benefit. And if my daughters, Sienna and Sylvia, are listening, I just want you to know how proud I am of you, and I love you so much. Bye now.